this gives you an overview of all the consonants of English arranged in the conventional way. You'll find these consonant grids in lots of books on phonetics and phonology. And what happens is that you have the place of articulation shown on the vertical columns, and the manner of articulation is shown in the horizontal rows. And the convention is that you always place the fortis consonants before the leaders. So if there's a pair, fortis always goes before leaders. So if we take, shall we say, in the top right left-hand corner there, we have bilabial plosive, P, B, telling you place and manner of articulation. The P goes before the B because there's a pair of consonants in this section, and that is the convention. Same way, if you take palatoalveolar, fricative, then you have sh, j, shown there, j, palatoalveolar, fricative, and the sh goes before the j, where you have a pair. Let's have a look at that bilabial consonant we talked about. And here you have P and B, the hold stage of the consonants. The plus and minus here is my way of showing whether the vocal folds are vibrating or not. In other words, whether it's voiced or voiceless. Plus is voiced, minus means that it's voiceless. So the way in which I show this is in that case. So I can show, in fact, two consonants there, both the P and the B. Then we have another way of describing our consonants and showing what exactly goes on, because we can show the stages of a stop consonant. This type of diagram we can call a timing diagram. It's something which represents the sequence in time. So time is shown here. This is what happens as things go on. Let's have a look at what that means. We have the passive articulator and the active articulator. Not so easy to do with the lips, because both of them can be active, but convention is that you say that the upper lip is the passive articulator. Let's have a go at saying the sound and seeing how this timing diagram works. So say everybody. Brilliant, good. Let's now only do what's called the approach stage, where the articulator is approaching. That gives us this. Everybody? So we've got to here on the diagram. Then you hold that for a period of time. That's why it's called the hold stage. If you're doing it properly, you should be out of unable to breathe by now. And then we have the release stage, the lips part, the air which has been stopped coming from the lungs. That's why we call them stop consonants. Then that's released. Pa, everybody? And you can hear that little explosion of sound as the sound is released. So those three stages then of a stop consonant. The approach stage, the hold stage, and the release stage. Now, in stop consonants, I'm going to say quite a bit about stop consonants. In stop consonants, you have some other markers in English of the opposition. Apart from merely whether the vocal folds are vibrating or not, whether it's voiced or voiceless, you also have these other two important effects, namely aspiration, sometimes called delayed voice onset time, sometimes abbreviated to VOT, and glottalization. And these are two very important features of these consonants in English. We can divide languages in the world between ones we can call aspiration languages and non-aspiration languages. Aspiration languages include, for example, English, Scandinavian languages like Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, Welsh, Japanese, Chinese, I haven't got it down here, but standard German. Non-aspiration languages are characteristic of Romance languages, so Spanish, French, Italian, not only those, also, for instance, Polish, and curiously, because it's a Germanic language, Dutch. So you have this division between these two types of languages in the way in which the plosives are produced. Let's have a look now at aspiration in English, what actually goes on. And so we can use our timing diagrams to show this. On this diagram here, PA stands for passive articulator, AA stands for active articulator, and VF stands for the vocal folds, so what's giving the voice. And we'll take it as in the word peak. If we take that, then pa, you should be able to hear a little puff of air, as it were, when I release the articulators for the P sound. See if you can imitate it. If you're Japanese, for instance, or if you speak one of the other aspiration languages, you should find it terribly easy. People who don't, I find it needs a bit more concentration. Just say that set now. Pa, everybody. Again. And you have that little puff of air. We represent it with a raised H coming during the release. What's really going on here? Well, what I think is going on here, and not all that many of the books state this, but my own impression of what's going on here, if I compare, shall we say, the English P sound to, say, for instance, a Dutch but sound, is that you have a different type of closure here. That for the aspiration languages, the closure is looser. It's not as tight as it is in, say, Dutch or Spanish or French. It's as if in English and other aspiration languages you have a leaky valve, and for the non-aspiration languages you have a tighter valve, which doesn't allow the air to escape in the same way. So I think that is the important thing about it. You can practice aspiration by, doing things like putting a piece of paper in front of your mouth and seeing if, I'll do it now. If I say pa, then you can see the paper move. But I sometimes find if I try to teach Spaniards to do it in that way, then it still doesn't sound like proper aspiration. And for getting proper aspiration, I think you have to get loose lips, or the English T produced with the tip of the tongue, so it's a loose closure, or the cut with a kind of gentle closure against the venom. Now, and the other significant effect that one has with English stop consonants is pre-glottalization in the fortis stops. Aspiration is a characteristic of fortis stops. You don't find it in the lenis stops. Similarly, glottalization is a characteristic of the fortis stops in English. And these are the fortis stops when they're in coda position. That's to say, at the end of syllables. With modern RP, and indeed in most British English accents, the overwhelming majority, also the overwhelming majority of American English accents, including the standard general American, syllable final fortis stops are accompanied by a reinforcing glottal stop. And this occurs at or before the hold stage. It's termed pre-glottalization, or glottal reinforcement, and it's one of the most significant phonetic markers of the final fortis stops in British English accents today. And it's on the increase. People seem to be using this glottalization more and more. I teach it to people. I've been teaching it to people now for the last 30 years or so, because contrary to what the impression given in most books, it's been around for a long time. We did some research on it. We discovered traces of it in the mid-19th century. So it's not something which happened yesterday afternoon. Quite a lot of time depth, as they say, to it. What's the effect? How is it be shown on one of our timing diagrams? Well, here you are. It's commonest with the consonant T, but I'm putting P in here because I've used P for the other examples. And so here, pre-glottalization in laptop, something which we all have to deal with these days, laptops. And in laptop, what happens here? Here are the vocal folds, okay? And here they are vibrating, wavy line showing vibrating. They come together briefly, they snap together here, and then the sound is released both at the vocal folds of the glottis and also at the lips. Let's see if you can imitate it. Let's see how you do on laptop, everybody. Laptop. You hear a little catch in your throat. If you're teaching it to people, you can call it a little catch in the throat. And even if you don't imitate it, then you should be able to recognize it. You should be able to recognize what's going on. You see, I'm producing them all the time. If you listen to me at the moment, I'm producing these glottal stops all the time. Sounds as if I've got a rather nasty throat disease. I think if you listen to it very carefully, because it's such a regular thing which happens. But notice only with fortis consonants. So there we are. So this effect, which we term pre-glottalization, very important as far as the consonants, the sub-consonants of English are concerned. Typical place for glottalization, syllable final fortis stops before the following consonant. So if I have, I don't like that fat guy, I don't like that fat guy, I've got a whole set of glottal stops. So try imitating it. I don't like that fat guy. You may wonder where I've got this sentence from. I can blame this, as so many other things in my life, on my wife, who mentioned to me at one time that I seemed to be just as round here as she referred to as a bay window, which I thought was rather unpleasant. And so I thought I'd prove her wrong by going over to the bathroom mirror and looking at myself. And indeed, I looked at my reflection in the mirror and I said, I don't like that fat guy. So that's the way in which we got this glottalization sentence. But you see here that these are all before these final stop consonants, particularly the final T's. Sometimes you can have variable glottalization and non-glottalization. So, for instance, before a pause, I can say it's too short, which will be non-glottalized, or it's too short. Before H, shorthand or shorthand. Word finally before a vowel, short of money or short of money. I find these difficult to say, they're not part of my speech. I am unfortunately old, and this type of glottalization is more characteristic of the speech of younger people. So if you listen to 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds these days, you'll find them producing these glottal stops in this case. I would advise you as non-natives, I would copy the aged in this. And I would say restrict your glottalization, if you introduce it, restrict it to where it comes pre-consonantally. So I wouldn't, I'm giving you the information, because you'll certainly hear this, but I'm giving you the information, but I would suggest that you only have it in pre-consonant positions. The words commonly affected by glottalization, in particular pre-glottalization and glottal replacement. Glottal replacement means where the consonant is totally replaced by glottal stop. And this essentially affects T most commonly, and in this group of high-frequency words. So it, bit, get, at, that, got, lot, not, and the contracted forms don't, can't, aren't, isn't, what, put, but, might, right, quite, out and about. So these common words, these frequent words, many of them being overwhelmingly being function words, grammatical words, these are which are most affected by glottalization. I'm going to move on now to something which is, to my way of thinking, nowhere near as important as glottalization. I haven't put this on the handout, but it is here, as you see, on PowerPoint. And that's something which people used to make a tremendous fuss about, nasal release. If you have a plosive followed by a homorganic nasal, homorganic is a posh way of saying same place of articulation. So this will be if you have, say, an alveolar consonant followed by another alveolar consonant. The soft palate lowers, and this allows the airstream to pass out through the nose. So you get something like this. Submit. Everybody? Submit. And so there's no little vowel in between, as you would find a sequence in many languages. If we take partner, and where you have these T's plus N, I have to think about it, because my natural speech is to say partner and to put glottal stop in there. So this then is nasal release, and you often have it resulting in what are known as syllabic consonants, where the consonant, in fact, is equivalent to a syllable. So you have here in shorten, rodent, there you have the effect that you have a syllabic consonant there. Once again, it's, to my way of thinking, not so significant, because if you put in a little schwa type vowel and say shorten and rodent, this isn't my own speech, but you'll find that in the speech of younger people, even if they are what I would call NRP speakers, speakers of non-regional pronunciation, standard Southern British English, whatever you want, modern RP, then you'll find that lots of people do put in this schwa type vowel and say shorten. So it's not a terrible sin if you don't have nasal release in that context. We've got some examples there with fortis plosives, witness, help me, where you have the likelihood, in fact, of glottalization rather than nasal release. And as I've just said, the sequence TN, as in shortened written pattern, is generally realized with glottal stop, that's it. Also, if you're interested in American English, this is one case where you regularly find Americans using glottalization. They don't tend to use it quite as consistently as in British English, but in the case of before N, cotton, Britain, they don't produce a voiced T. We'll come on to what that is in a second or two, but instead of that, they have glottal stop. So President Clinton, for instance, was pronounced in that word way. A similar effect is lateral release. And here the alveolar closure for the L is released by lowering the sides of the tongue. So this gives us effects like settle and paddle. And similar articulation types you'll find in prickle, struggle, grapple, no glottalization here. Don't ask me why, but it just doesn't exist. So if you hear somebody saying settle, then you will hear people saying settle, then they're much influenced by London English. Traditional London English has much more extensive use of glottal stop. So don't put your glottal stops into sequences where you have L before N, splendid, but not before L. Here you have a representation, we've been talking about nasal consonants, and here you have a representation of the nasal N, and I have made a mistake, so because I should have gone on to something else for the moment. Hang on a moment. There we are. Because I've missed out something which is on your handout and not on your PowerPoint. If you look at the handout, we were talking about American English, and there's a feature of American English which I feel is sufficiently significant for you to need to know about it. So there, after glottal replacement, we have Tvoicing. And American English accents, including standard general American, are well known for the effect of Tvoicing, where you have interfagalic T, generally where you have a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable, one with a weak vowel. So in words like British, pretty, but I know, that I am, are pronounced with a little flap-like sound, a voiced T. We call it Tvoicing. So it'll be pronounced as British, pretty, but I know, but I am. And this is characteristic of American English, particularly common in high-frequency words and expression. The brevity of the tap is supposedly enough to maintain a contrast with D. When I listen to Americans, I think this contrast with D, despite what it says in some of the textbooks, is very frequently lost. And this is confirmed by the fact that American children make mistakes with words like atom and spell it with D. So they'll spell Adam and atom in the same way because they pronounce them as Adam. So yeah, Adam is studying the atom, and so they pronounce it the same way. You get something of this effect in British English. It's not in traditional RP, but certainly in modern RP, you will get some Tvoicing used. You don't need, I think, to imitate it, though you should, of course, recognize what's going on. Also on your handout, I've just mentioned, reminding you of two other stop consonants. So the ch and j, these are two phonemic affricate consonants. The big area of the tongue is used to produce these sounds. What I want to underline is that firstly you have a relatively slow release. So if we say acha, everybody, acha, aja, then you have a relative, and you can hear the friction in the release. So it's like a sh or j sound that follows. And something else which is happening, which is also helps to distinguish these sounds, and that is you have a special type of lip rounding. I term it trumpet-shaped lip rounding. So if I say ch, 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 you see that? I got this sort of shape in my lips, and saying with aja, aja. Something you can practice with a mirror quite easily, and something which, if you find it difficult to say these sounds, you might find very helpful as an additional way of imitating them. It's the same sound that we'll find when we come to fricative sh and j. Exactly the same friction is produced there, and you also have this lip rounding. Now I think I can go on to my nasal consonants. So here you have nasal M, and so this is ma, everybody. And if you want to believe that these sounds are nasals, then there's a very good way of testing it out. If you have students who doubt whether it's actually formed by the air going out through your nose, all you have to do is just say, everybody, and then pinch your nose. And you'll find it's quite impossible to produce the sound unless you have the release of the air coming out through the nose. There's not much to say about these nasals in terms of teaching, in terms of their use in language teaching. The only thing is this: some languages, including English, have a range of nasals. So we have in final position. So we have m as in ram, and we have n as in ran, and we have eng, velar nasal, as in rang. Other languages only have one nasal. I don't know of any languages which don't have nasals, but in final position, it's not all that uncommon to find that there's only one nasal consonant. And if that's so, and it's true, for instance, of Spanish, and I believe also true of Japanese, then one has to concentrate on the nasals in final position, because otherwise you get a negative transfer of these nasal codas. So English, three possibilities: M, N, N, as in rum, run, run. In Spanish, only one possibility, N, as in sin. And so therefore you have the likelihood of negative transfer. By that I mean, in straightforward English, transferring bad habits from the mother tongue to the target language. There are two marginal phonemes in English which are worth mentioning. They're worth mentioning from the point of view of curiosity. They're not worth mentioning because they're important. One is the hua sound. We represent it with a W upside down. Sometimes you have it represented with HW. In words like which, why, whether, wheel, and which used to be pronounced which, why, whether, and wheel. Very useful. If you saw a whole lot of ladies flying through the sky on broomsticks, you could say which, and nobody would be confused. But nowadays, I'm afraid you can't. You'll have to say which in British English at any rate. You find it somewhat more commonly in American English, but even there I find it dying out at speed. But a lot of people in Britain think that they ought to pronounce it. They have terrible respect for spelling. And in consequence, if you listen to the British radio, you'll sometimes find presenters desperately attempting to pronounce these WH sounds, which are quite foreign. They really died out more or less in the 18th century in most British English. It leads to what we call hyper-correct forms. John Humphreys, for those who know him, he's a great sinner as far as this is concerned. He was born in the same city as Jack and I. He was born in Cardiff, and there are no WHs in Cardiff, are there, Jack? He shakes his head. I heard one beautiful gaffe from a BBC announcer where he talked about the Isle of Wight. And another one talked about the ways of the world, the name of the play by Congreve. But as I say, you'll still find that some British people believe that you ought to pronounce this. The velar fricative ch you only need to know about because it's in proper names and foreign words, so loch and Harlech, which is the name of a Welsh town. People who want to try to speak Spanish and say Rioja. But you can do without ch, even though you'll find it in Scottish dialects of English. Same way as hua is alive and well in Scottish accents of English and also in Irish English, but not, as I say, in the most the type of English which you're learning. I'm now going to go on to deal briefly with the fricatives in English. For many of them, there's not a great deal we have to say. May I remind you that these cross-sections will be available on your support line, so online scale. So you don't need to worry about them. You don't need to draw them. Anybody who is a potential Rembrandt or Vermeer or something of the sort, you don't need to worry about this. So here you have the cross-section for F and V. So plus and minus there in my diagrams show you where the voice is voicing, as in plus, and voiceless as in minus. So this gives us a-fa, a-va, everybody? A-fa, a-va. When you see a diagram in a book, it's a very good idea to try to imitate it. This gets it into your mind and also into your body, as it were. So it means that you go through the movements. The important thing about fa and va in English is that they're made with true labiodental, so lip and teeth for contact. So they're not bilabial, a, fa, a, va. And this forms a difference between some languages and a lot of people here speak those languages, Japanese and Spanish. In particular, of course, you have to separate V and B. I always say that's very, very important. Here we have the fricatives th and the. These are a problem for lots of people. One thing is, don't try to say them by sticking your tongue halfway out of your mouth. You'll find that, in fact, a-tha, a-tha are made with the tongue often just behind the teeth. If you're speaking carefully to an audience, as I am at the moment, then I'm likely to push the tongue a bit further forward. A-tha, a-tha. But normally, I'll be saying these with my tongue just behind my teeth. One of the useful things about the sound is it's very likely to be assimilated in context. So if I say in the corner, all the books, then I often just produce a long L or a long N. And this is a little trick which you can use. We'll be saying more about it tomorrow when I talk about features of connected speech. A little trick which you can use to cut out a lot of the awkward the sounds. Fricatives S and Z. The characteristic of S and Z is the shape of the tongue. And if you look at your handout or on PowerPoint here, then you'll see that the tongue is in a groove shape for S and Z. I can prove this to you quite easily by, if you say S, say it. If you're saying it properly, and breathe in, then you should feel cold air along the middle of your tongue. And this shows that you've got the groove that's necessary for the S and Z sounds. Here we have sh and j. Notice, as I said for the affricates, ch and j earlier, these have a much greater area of the tongue, making near contact with the roof of the mouth, and notice also the trumpet-shaped lip rounding. So this gives us ASHA, ASHA. Sh is by far the commoner sound. J is only used essentially in medial position, that's to say in the middle of a word. L sounds, which we've already mentioned, these, we have a smart word for them, lateral approximants. Here you have the sides of the tongue lowered. You should feel, if you breathe in, cold air along the sides of the tongue. Say an L, a la, and then breathe in, a la, l. And you should feel cold air along either one or both sides of the tongue. The dark L, which is found in coda position, this has the addition of a secondary articulation. It has velarization, in other words. And this gives you the effect, all, everybody? All. So if I say a word like fill, then you should there feel that the sound is somewhat darker, more oo-like. With many younger speakers today, in fact, the dark L is replaced by an oo-like sound. So you'll hear people saying things like full and all. I don't recommend that you imitate it, but you'll certainly hear that lots of people do produce it just as a vowel-like sound in that way. If you don't make a contrast between clear L and dark L, it matters not one bit as far as intelligibility is concerned. If you say it's very cool, then people will understand. It's only that it does sound noticeable, something which is characteristic, for instance, of some German accents. But also, if you go to Wales or parts of Ireland, then you'll find that English native speakers there also pronounce clear L everywhere. So it's not something which is of prime significance. It's not a phonemic contrast. The sound which people in some languages, particularly Japanese, Chinese, confuse the L with is R. And there you have a cross-section of R. And you'll see it's always shown with the tip raised. I've shown it in that way as well. What seems to be more important with the English R sound is that the sides of the tongue are raised. And the sides of the tongue being raised, this is more important than the tip of the tongue being raised. And you may find that you can get to this sound most easily by producing an R-like sound. If you're Japanese, it's very characteristic of one of the sounds in Mandarin Chinese. And that's this sound. You know the one I mean? And you might find that if you move from that, try saying it, okay, and then make it somewhat briefer, red, then you will have something which is similar to the English R sound. In American English, you also find it as a syllabic, so people say things like better, but you don't have that in the standard language in English. Here you have two post-alveolar affricates, tr, dr, as in train and drain. And there you can see that in that particular context, that the sound is produced by the tongue actually touching the roof of the mouth. You'll get slight lip rounding with English R, and it's different from the trumpet-shaped lip rounding we mentioned earlier. It's much more gentle type of lip rounding. But if I say red, you can see that my lips will be rounded. And you can imitate this lip rounding if you find that improves the articulation. There's a reminder on your handout of the difference between rhotic and non-rhotic accents. Non-rhotic accents, but we've already discussed that. British English is non-rhotic, American English is rhotic. In Britain you'll find rhotic accents in Scotland, Ireland and the west of England. That's noted down there for you. We move on to approximant sounds, and the first one is y, as in yam. And you'll see here these diagrams which show that the approximants y and w can actually be shown on vowel diagrams. And this is similar to a vowel of an E type, followed by an A. Try saying E, everybody. E. And then say A. And then say ia. And then add an M to it. Yeah. So it's a brief E-like vowel glide. And if you're in a language where you have difficulty in saying that, that's one of the ways of getting to it. In modern British English, the yod, which is the smart name for the y sound, comes from Hebrew, you'll find that there are sequences which are traditionally shown as tia, dia, rather difficult to pronounce for some people. So things like tune and dune. But these are nowadays very commonly replaced by palatoalveolar affricates, ch, ch. I have to think very hard to say Tuesday. My normal speech is Tuesday. Medially, you also get it, for instance, in a word like module. Across word boundaries, you get this same effect of yod coalescence. The coalescence part of it means sticking together, as it were, merging together. So where you have you and your, particularly, so you have things like can't you, did you, mind your own business, and so you have this effect across word boundaries. And as I've said already, it's now the most frequent pronunciation in stressed syllables. So Tuesday and June. In American English, one has the effect of yod dropping. And this is the counterpart of the coalescence in British English. So words like Tuesday will be pronounced as Tuesday. Tuesday. Dune, my June, will be pronounced as Dune. News will be pronounced as news. There is one American word where you hear this very, very often, which has become a popular word, which is the word dude, D-U-D-E, as a way of addressing somebody. Very, very familiar way of addressing somebody. If you happen to meet an American archbishop or something, you don't call him dude. But Americans talking between themselves will often use this word. And dude is the way in which they pronounce it. You also find this effect, this yod dropping effect, in some British regional accents. You don't have to go far from this building. You'll probably hear it if you keep your ears open on London buses or London tubes, London buses and London tubes, I should say. You'll find that quite a lot of Londoners have this yod dropping effect. And here we have W, the last thing I'm going to talk about today, the same effect that we had before with E plus A, we can have with W. Once again, it can be shown on the vowel diagram. It's essentially the tongue lowering. It's a kind of diphthongal effect. And so if you say an oo type vowel, say oo, and then you go on to an ok type vowel, and say ooh, everybody. Ooh, ooh, and then put a T on the end. You have the word watt, unit of electricity. Watt, everybody. Watt. Okay. So that then gives you a way, once again, of getting at these approximate sounds. This brings me to the end of what I have to say. At least it will bring me to the end if I can sort these pages out. Hang on a moment. Here we are. This brings me to the end of what I have to say about the consonant sounds. Once again, as I said, you can find the PowerPoint slides, or you will be able to find them very shortly on the support program. Tomorrow we'll be moving on to consider what happens when we speak in normal, everyday conversation. That's to say, somewhat more rapidly than we normally do in the classroom. And it will provide us with an introduction to what I often call the surprises of connected speech.